I'm Timothy Snyder. I'm doing a series of videos where I return to the lessons of On Tyranny. We're probably going to call it Timothy Snyder Speaks About On Tyranny. It's been several years since the book came out. It's been almost half a decade since I came up with the lessons. A lot has happened in between. An entire term of Mr. Trump, for example. A lot has happened to us in between. A good thing that's happened to the book is that it's been updated. The text has been updated a bit by me, but more importantly, the book is now going to appear framed by the wonderful illustrations of Nora Krug. The book's going to appear in October of 2021. I'm talking to you in the summer. So I'm using this as an occasion to work through the lessons again. I've been closer to this text now than I have been for a little while. And what I'm going to do is offer a few reflections on it, on each lesson, having read the lesson. So today we're on lesson 8 of On Tyranny, which is stand out. Stand out. Someone has to. It is easy to follow along. It can feel strange to do or say something different. But without that unease, there is no freedom. Remember Rosa Parks. The moment you set an example, the spell of the status quo is broken, and others will follow. So along with lesson number 1, Don't Obey in Advance, this one is special to me because it's the one which is most individual. It's closest to the classic idea of freedom, where you're recognizing the world around you and you're doing something else. You're not obeying in lesson 1. Here in lesson 8, you're standing out. Another thing these lessons have in common is the feeling of discomfort. And the feeling of discomfort is good. I'm not saying pain is good or suffering is good, but I'm saying that feeling where you suddenly realize that not everyone is with you and you're not with everyone. That moment when you recognize that you've stood out a bit, that feeling is very, very important. It's uncomfortable because we're social creatures. We're creatures who are very good at adapting, and that's appropriate a lot of the time. If you're playing bridge or you're going bowling, or if you're walking into a party where you only know a few people, it's important that you adapt to the rules, to the situation, to other people's expectations. But then part of being a political person, or even having a polity worthy of the name, is recognizing the moments that aren't just social moments. Recognizing the moments where following the rules, flowing into the expectations, doing what people expect of you, that's not just not enough, it's the wrong thing. That's a little uncomfortable. That's what I mean by standing out, but it's good. It's good to stand out. It's good to have that feeling, because when you have that feeling, you're the one then who's reshuffling the deck. You're the one who's changing the status quo. You're the one who's reordering the symbols. If you stand out just a little bit, you've made the whole future go off in a different direction. And that can't be done without standing out. In the little chapter that follows this lesson, I give a couple kinds of examples of standing out. At one end, we have a young woman called Teresa Prekarova, who rescued a family from the Warsaw Ghetto during the Holocaust. The interesting thing about Teresa was that she didn't change when everyone around her changed. And that's one way to stand out, to have a set of values and to hold close to them, even when other people are adapting, and even when other people think that it's a little bit strange, a little bit weird, that you're holding on to your values, right? That you have integrity. At the other end of the spectrum, there was another kind of standing out in this chapter, which was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill in 1940, the decision to keep Great Britain in the war, and the work by an individual of recognizing the world historical moment, frankly, and standing out by doing what his country didn't necessarily want him to do. The interesting thing about that, of course, is that because Churchill chose to keep fighting, because the British with him chose to keep fighting, everything about British history after that point and the way that the English and the British understand themselves is different. if Churchill had been like other politicians and said, let's make a reasonable compromise, everything after that would have been different. But regardless of the scale, you can see these two important parts of standing out. That you're standing out on the basis of things that you believe, and you're also standing on the basis of recognizing a situation as in some way being unacceptable. For Teresa Prekarova, the situation was local. It was the Warsaw Ghetto. For Churchill, it was global. It was Nazi power as such. But in both cases, you have this sense of what is right up against the circumstances. I can't now give a list of all the Americans who have stood out in the last 5 years, and that's for a very good reason. There have been a lot of them, and most of the people who stand out are more like Teresa Prekarova than they're like Winston Churchill. Most of the people who stand out are not going to be remembered by history. They're going to change history, but they're not going to be remembered by history. That things did not go as badly as they might have gone in the last 4 or 5 years in the US has to do with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who chose to stand out in small ways or in larger ways. I will mention a couple names though. I'll bring together a couple groups of people. There were the people who kept doing what they should have been doing in their professional roles, going back to the lesson on professional ethics. People like Alexander Vindman or Fiona Hill or the other people who testified in that hearing. There are people who recognize that if a president of the United States is asking a foreign country to help him in an election, then that's not an acceptable situation, and that we must have some value within us which allows us to stand out, even if we pay a price, right? As Mr. Vindman certainly did. There were people who stood out because they found unusual ways to deal with basic problems. So many, I can't mention them in a short video, but I'll mention a couple. On one side, someone like Stacey Abrams, who recognized that the issue of voting is so fundamental to the future and the moral character, the moral shape of our country, that it was worth devoting oneself to. She's not the only one who did this. I mentioned her as one name of many who stood out, and I'm going to return to why voting and standing out go together. Or in a completely different part of the world, someone like Tim Wu, who recognized that bigger is worse, that the existence of huge monopolies in our economy is bad for everyone. It's not a popular position. It's not an obvious position, but it's a true position. And it's a position he took very clearly and that he's now making policy around. There are people who stood out because at extraordinary moments of difficulty, they recognized they had to do something extraordinary in response. Like, for example, the Capitol Police officer, Eugene Goodman, thanks to whom I think it's fair to say our political order has a much better chance of surviving. What Mr. Goodman did was truly extraordinary in recognizing an imminent threat, not just to important people in an important place, but to our whole order, and in acting creatively and humbly. And then, of course, again, from another position entirely in our social and political order, someone like Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is the first person to vote for the impeachment of a president in his own political party in the history of the United States. One does not have to agree with Senator Romney on all of his positions to note that this is what he will be remembered for. If there is a democracy in the United States in 50 years and people are still writing its history, he will be remembered for that, because that will be the thing that he did, that moment when he chose to be different, that ended up making a difference. As I said, there are too many people. I can't list them. These are meant to be short videos. But the interesting thing about standing out, as I think has been suggested even by this very, very, very short list, is how when you stand out, it means that you're showing yourself as an individual, right? Standing out in a broad way. It's not just about holding back things that are bad. It's also about asserting unpredictability, individuality, which are essential elements of what we think about as freedom. I said I would return to voting, and I will. Rosa Parks, I mentioned in the original lesson. There's something important here that connects to the issue of voting. It's easy in general in our country for white people to vote. or easier, right? If you're a white person listening to this, you don't wait online probably to vote. And if you're a black person listening to this, you probably do wait for a very long time to vote. I realize individual experiences will be different, but on average, that's the way things are. And the way that our voting is being taken away from us, as usual in American history, is by starting with the black people. And so what I'm saying here is that it's not enough for there to be people like African Americans like Stacey Abrams who stand out and say this is a problem not just for African Americans, but for the whole system. There also have to be white people. And when I say white people standing out here, I mean in a specific way, because it's not our problem yet, right? That's how you can react to it. You can say it's not our problem, right? Maybe it's difficult for them, but all in all, things are okay because it doesn't touch upon us. But you have to stand out, if only a little bit, just a little bit from all those other white people who don't really care about voting as long as they get to vote. You have to stand out, if only just a little bit. That's the funny thing, right? In order for us to have a citizenry, in order for us to all be together, in order for us all to have the same rights, some of us have to pop up a little bit every now and again and go against the current, go against the grain, go against the people who are immediately around us, if only a little bit. We have to do that. In the years to come, I think voting rights is going to be a place where people are going to have to stand out. This was lesson 8. Thank you very much.